It was springtime in 1986 when a fire investigator pulled up in front of a small, quiet home in upstate New York. The house itself stood still, its charred remains long since cooled, but this was no ordinary fire. This was personal. The investigator had lost a friend here, and now he was determined to find out what had really happened. As he stepped through the front door, he was immediately hit with the overwhelming sight of destruction. Smoke damage coated the walls in deep black soot, the air still holding a faint, sickly, sweet odor. But it wasn't until he entered the bedroom, the apparent starting point of the fire, that he saw something so unsettling, so impossible, that he knew right then and there, this fire was unlike anything he had ever seen before.
You are watching Beyond Belief.
On the evening of March 26, 1986, 32-year-old Kendall Mudd was driving toward his father's home. His dad, 58-year-old George Mudd, lived alone, and that day, Kendall's sister Kimberly had called him several times. Each time, her calls had gone unanswered. That was unlike their father. He might have been in declining health, but he was always available, always around. George was a retired firefighter, a man who had spent years battling blazes and saving lives, but in recent years his body had started betraying him. He had been a smoker for decades, and his lungs had paid the price. He was on an oxygen machine and had just recovered from pneumonia, so when Kimberly begged Kendall to check on him, Kendall agreed. Though he wasn't particularly worried. Maybe their dad had gone out to his favorite diner, the Wagon Wheel, to catch up with old friends. He planned to let himself inside and wait for his father to return. But as Kendall pulled up to the house, something immediately felt off. The windows looked different. They had a strange dark tint to them, almost as if they had been painted black. He frowned and knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle, and that's when he felt it. The doorknob was hot. A jolt of fear surged through Kendall. His father's house was small, tucked away in the woods, and the nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. If there had been a fire, no one would have seen it. He yanked the door open, bracing himself for a wall of flames. But instead, the house was eerily quiet and pitch black. A thick haze hung in the air, making it nearly impossible to see. It smelled of smoke, but carried something else. A strange, sweet, almost chemical scent that turned Kendall's stomach. The lights wouldn't turn on, and as he took a step inside, calling for his father, he realized something was very wrong. Panic set in. He had to find his dad, but without light, the house was a maze of shadows. He needed a flashlight. Kendall ran back outside, jumped in his car, and sped to the nearest neighbor's house. When he returned minutes later with the neighbor in tow, he found himself hesitating at the door. He had wanted to believe that his father simply wasn't home, that everything was fine. But now, with a flashlight in hand, the truth was about to be illuminated. And Kendall wasn't sure he was ready to see it. As the flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, the neighbor stepped inside. Minutes passed, but to Kendall they felt like hours. Then the neighbor returned, his face grim. Something horrible had happened inside that house. Within the hour, investigators arrived, combing through the scene. A fire had indeed occurred, but its behavior defied logic. The living room walls were coated in soot, yet nothing had burned. A table sat in the center of the room, its surface warped from heat, with 3 pill bottles melted together in a single grotesque mass. The plastic handle of a fly swatter had liquefied, but the wooden table beneath it was untouched. The kitchen wallpaper was pristine, yet inside the refrigerator, the butter had melted into a yellow puddle and a pack of hot dogs had cooked inside its plastic wrapping. It didn't make sense. But the most disturbing discovery awaited them in the bedroom. The bed was destroyed. The mattress was nothing more than tangled metal coils sagging into a deep blackened hole burned straight through the floorboards, and in that hole were human remains. A foot severed near the ankle dangled among the melted mattress springs. A fragment of a skull rested near what had been the headboard. Tiny piles of fine black ash dotted the floor beneath. That was all that was left of George Mudd. At nearly 200 pounds in life, George had been reduced to just a few pounds of ash. He had not simply burned, he had been cremated. But here was the impossible part. The fire had consumed only him. His oxygen machine, sitting inches away from the blaze, was still running. A plastic model ship remained untouched. His wooden dresser sat pristine. The house should have been an inferno. Instead, it stood intact, a bizarre crime scene of contradictions. And yet, there was no sign of arson, no electrical malfunction, no gas leak, no clear cause of ignition. After weeks of dead ends, officials closed the case. They ruled George's death an accident. But for one investigator, that wasn't good enough. Tony Mott, a firefighter and longtime friend of George's, refused to let the mystery die. The physics of fire didn't add up here. If the room had gotten hot enough to reduce a man to ash, the entire house should have been burned down. Desperate for answers, Tony reached out to an obscure research group called Parascience International. That's when he met Larry Arnold. Larry was an expert in one of the strangest, most controversial phenomena in history: spontaneous human combustion. And when he heard the details of George's case, he knew exactly what he was dealing with. George wasn't the first. In 1725, a woman in Paris was found reduced to ash in her kitchen, the wooden utensils nearby untouched. In 1951, a woman in Florida was incinerated in her chair, her body reduced to dust except for her leg, just like George. In 1970, an Irish widow was found burned beyond recognition. Her body turned to ash while plastic flowers sitting on her table had only partially melted. The pattern was always the same: victims burned from the inside out. Theories ranged from divine punishment to alcohol-induced combustion, but Larry believed the answer lay within the body itself. What if human bioelectricity, our nervous system, our heartbeat, could ignite? What if, under rare and unknown conditions, a person could burn from within? Tony wasn't sure what to believe, but he knew one thing for certain: nothing else explained what had happened to George Mudd. Officially, George's case remains an accident, but to those who have studied the phenomenon, his death stands as one of the strongest pieces of evidence that spontaneous human combustion may not be science fiction. It may be real, and it may be waiting to happen again. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed today's story, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories and mysteries. Until next time, see ya.